Right, some things I need to be aware of. That's not me. That's you. I hope. Um, we start off with the usual um, uh, advertisement, but I understand that somebody's found a copy that's 200 and some odd pounds. So I should grab as many of them as you possibly can. Um, I've also mentioned Dave Cushman's website. I'll mention it a couple of times during the presentation, but there's still quite a lot of beekeepers that aren't aware of it and haven't logged on. So this presentation then it follows some simple things you may not have been told. It's on a similar sort of vein, but it's more practical than that. A lot of things that are in it may not be found in books or be taught. That's probably because I've sort of hit upon them as I've gone through my beekeeping, or it may be some of the things that I picked up from other people, or in my case, what I was taught by the older beekeepers that may well have gone out of fashion or was never actually written down. However, they're all still very relevant to beekeeping really wherever you are and shouldn't really be dismissed. And this is one of the issues with modern beekeeping. If it's not in the book or it's not scientifically proven, some people just don't take any notice of it or even dismiss it. But the further you go into beekeeping, the more you'll find out for yourself. And it's what I call colony years. The more you can get your head stuck into a beehive, the more often the more you will actually learn and what you'll pick up. By observation, that is. And I have got a title, another webinar. Just have a look at the recording and some of the things in there you'll see that that are appropriate to all beekeepers. Now, this is a sort of just starting group, so it really will be quite basic. I do understand there's some people with quite a lot of colonies, but okay, some of it will be relevant to you. Some you probably know anyway. There are an awful lot of bee books around. If you just look at the Northern Bee Book stand at a show, you'll find there's a whole load of books. I'm not discrediting any at all, but they're often very good at getting you into trouble, but they're not always very good at getting you out of it. Some of the standards are pretty good, but I'm afraid there are some which are the newer books. Some of them perhaps are a bit flashy, got loads of pictures, and there isn't too much content to them, some of which might be a bit on the dubious side. And as I've already mentioned, you really cannot replace getting your head stuck into a beehive, and lots and lots and lots of times, not just deliberately, but every time you're there, just keep your eyes skinned, and it's surprising what you'll pick up. R.O.B. Manley, Robert Orlando Beta Manley, was one of three of the biggest commercial beekeepers in the middle of the sort of 20th century. He's the only one that wrote any books. In fact, he wrote three. One of them was in 1948 called Beekeeping in Britain. Now, Manley was the first person to keep and manage 1,000 colonies in this country. And I quote from his book: "When I began, I constantly ran up against difficulties that no book that I could find did much to explain. The authors often contradicted one another, and which of them was a poor novice to believe?" Now, he was talking about around about the time of the First World War, of course. But he wrote the book in 1948, and it's still true over 70 years later. But beekeeping over the years has changed. I've only been involved just over half a century. But when I started, about 50% of our members at Whisper Green, my local association, worked on the land in some way. Okay, we were we're in a rural area, but I constantly ask how many people work on the land when I do a presentation or something like that. and these days it's 10% if you're lucky. Now, a lot of those people had more colonies than people have now, probably 10, dozen, 15 or more, anything up to about 50. And because a lot of these people were on low income, probably lived in tied cottages or whatever, they sold honey at the garden gate to augment their income. In those days, there were far less problems with bees than there are now. And you could actually put, and this is what quite a lot of them did, you could put 3 supers on a colony in April, take them off in August, extract the honey. If they wanted a little bit of feed, you give it to them. If they didn't want any feed, you just didn't bother. And that was their beekeeping. You cannot do that these days. These were, of course, practical people because they were used to livestock, and it really doesn't matter whether you're looking after sheep, chickens, goats, cattle, or even bees. The basic principles are actually the same. Now, I think beekeepers seem to be less practical than they were. There's a different work culture too. In the old days, if somebody ran out of their own work, they go and find something to do to help somebody else. These days, it's not quite so easy to do because you haven't been trained or haven't got the piece of paper or whatever. There's far more problems with bees now than there used to be. And I don't want to put you folk off, but you're coming into beekeeping at a much more difficult time than I certainly did. There's also different ways of learning now. No longer is it watching somebody and copying them. There's lots of different ways of learning, going on courses and all sorts of things like that now. Certainly in my time, oilseed rape has come in. That came in the mid-1970s. We've had Varroa and viruses, which have also come in as well. Consequently, management of colonies has changed, and we've, as beekeepers, we've got to try and keep abreast of that. What it does mean is that some of the older books, although the beekeeping content is still very relevant and still very, very sound in many instances, of course, they haven't taken into account, or they haven't mentioned things like Varroa and oilseed rape. So what I call the basics have stayed exactly the same. We've now got more knowledge. We've got scientific knowledge that wasn't really available at the time. And of course, things are being discovered all the time. Not always relevant to practical beekeeping, but quite a lot of it is. But if you think about it, a lot of what we do as beekeepers isn't actually beekeeping. Things like making up syrup, feeding, making hives and frames, lighting a smoker, lifting, handling the harvest, all those sort of things could be done by a non-beekeeper, probably quite competently, and it doesn't matter that they don't know anything about beekeeping at all. So let's look just a little bit at some of the tools that we need as beekeepers. Using a smoker, I reckon it's management. It's not just a case of, oh yeah, I've got a smoker, I need to do this or that or the other with it. There's a little bit more to it. I'm encouraging you to use it. I know there are some people who say, oh, I never smoke my bees. If they don't, there's usually 1 or 2 things that that are appropriate. One is they're probably fully booted and suited so they don't get stung. And the other one is their bees are probably so soft that they would not survive without what I call mollycoddling. So overfeeding, insulation, and treating with all sorts of supplements and things like that. So I suggest you use it. It is actually a skill. And when I say a skill, you need to know when to use it. And if you use it in time, just a little bit of smoke does the job. Whereas I do see people with great wafts of smoke. If they've lost control, that's poor skill. Keep it alight as well, and not all beekeepers are very good at doing that, because that's also quite a skill too. Gather fuel, gather something that's slow burning and dry as well. If you gather it when it's wet, just put it in a shallow tray in a greenhouse or conservatory or something like that, and it'll dry it out. And I've got an old rucksack. When I take the dogs for a walk, I get some touchwood, which I'll show you in a minute. Fill the rucksack up, bring it home, put it in the greenhouse, and I'm okay for another month or two. And look after a smoker too. It's a tool. I see so many people, they just chuck it down or chuck it in the shed until the next time. And it's nowhere near as efficient as it was last time for various reasons. And with a bit more effort, they could have an efficient smoker. This is what I use, touchwood, and I'm sure you all know what that is. And there's my smoker with it lit. Don't just fill up the smoker and light the top, as I see so many people doing. And this is where it comes back to practical people, because it's really the sort of stuff you learn in science lessons at school. It's not really beekeeping. What I suggest you do, and this is what I do, every time you light a smoker, empty it out, clean it out. I put newspaper in the bottom, light that, or light it and then put it in the bottom, and then put something on top that burns easily. Dry grass is good, hay is good, and that's not necessarily the same thing. Dry grass can come from lawn mowings or anything like that. Hay you can pick up anywhere, edge of a field or whatever. Straw is good as well. And then the previous load, what you've emptied out, put that in on top, because that's partly burnt, and that will catch light ever so quickly. So you don't have to waste it. And I see so many people just tipping it out, and then it's lost. And then put once that's light, just put your main fuel on top, which in my case is generally touchwood, but wood chippings are good. I mean chippings, not shavings. They're really good. And if you've got something that's loose inside, just put some green grass on the top. You don't have to plug the nozzle up, but just green grass on the top, and what you've got inside won't blast out of the nozzle. It won't blow sparks on the bees, and it'll cool the smoke down as well. When you're finished, just plug the nozzle up with grass and lay it on its side, and within a minute or two it will go out. Don't empty it, because of course you need that for the next time round. So it really is management of a smoker. Now I haven't quite finished, because round the rim here you very often get some soot. That just needs cleaning away every so often, because then it's so much easier to put the lid on the smoker. Keep it upright and it'll stay alight for as long as you've got fuel in there. If you want to, you can do your bees, you can go in and have lunch or a cup of tea or something like that, and you come back half hour later and it should still be alight. And then lay it down and it should go out. Okay, I haven't got the nozzle plugged up on that. Now, when you're handling bees, if you've got 4 supers, as I have there, long gone are the days when I can lift 4 supers in one hit, full ones, I mean, not half empty ones. So I just don't bother anymore. So if you do split them, if you get different faces of bees, such as you take the supers off one at a time, make sure you cover them all up, because for some reason, and I've never discovered why, if one of those faces gets fired up, they all do. They seem to be able to communicate between between themselves through the air somehow. I don't know how on earth they do it. So just cover up the boxes. This one here is has got the crown board on top. That's obviously the top two supers. I can never ever see the point of taking the crown board off unless you want to put a spare super on the top, because if you do, you're creating more work for the bees by propolizing the gap up again. You can tell by the weight, and if not, just tip it up and have a look underneath to see if they need another super. But the other one, of course, you're going to leave the top exposed. So just a spare crown board. I wouldn't use a cloth because you've only got to have a windy day. The cloth blows off and cause yourself problems. But don't forget, I'm standing there, so keep feet clear, and then look where the frames are in the hive. You can handle them easily. Whereas if you're at the back, it's going to be much more difficult because you've got to reach right across the bees, and it's not easy holding a frame that way. So that should make it nice and easy for you. Here's another one, similar situation. I haven't got a spare crown board, so I'll just use the roof of the hive. That's fine, no problem. Look again. I'm not going to be able to trip over anything because I haven't got anything there in the first place. When you take the supers off, don't just put them down on a flat roof, as I've seen so many people do, because all you do is get 4 lines of dead bees, which of course is which is underneath the supers all the way around. So if you flip the roof over, it just gives you point contact, which is, yep, there. And the chances of killing bees are pretty remote, or certainly far less than they were anyway. And it's nice and easy for you. Incidentally, as you probably know, I put my record sheets on a clipboard. I tend to put the clipboard out of the way, because if you don't, it's surprising how you can get drips of honey on it, and then of course it gets sticky, and it gives you a problem as well. When I'm handling bees, I've generally got a bucket of water with me, especially on a day when you've got a nectar flow on, because you can get horribly sticky. If you've got bare hands, of course, you know you're sticky, so you can wash the hive tool off and the smoker and that. If you wear gloves, of course, everything gets horribly sticky. So be aware of that. Now you notice that I've got the porta bee escape holes, feed holes, call them what you like, closed. The reason for that I'll give you in a minute, but I do see people with they fill it up with the hole with they put the porta bee escape in. What happens is, of course, the bees propolize them up. So then, when you need the porta bee escape, you've got to clean them. So I would I wouldn't do it. I don't use porta bee escapes anyway, because for clearing supers, I've got better ways of doing it. A lot of beekeepers leave that hole open, and they think, I think erroneously, that it creates ventilation. It might create a little bit of ventilation, but even worse still, it creates a gap in the roof that gets filled up with comb. Because if you've got anywhere near enough supers on, that's usually what happens. There's a porta bee escape that I see so many people put in the crown boards during the summer. And you can see what's happened here. This one's been left open, and you can just see a little bit of comb being built there. This isn't the same one, but that's the start of it, and that's what you end up with. And I've come across ever so many far worse than that. And you can just see a rim of propolis being built here. The bees propolis this all up, and of course it causes problems. You can't get the roof off very well, and even if you can, you can't get smoke underneath. All of a sudden, you've got a face full of bees. So try to avoid that, folks, because it's not necessary. It might be necessary or thought to be necessary if you put hives in full sun, but if you put them in the shade, as is much better for the bees, then you haven't got a problem anyway. All you can say is it's one way of getting comb honey, but that's probably not worth the hassle. When you're putting the supers back, I suggest very strongly that you just give a puff of smoke underneath the supers. Not on my own bees so much, but on many occasions I've lifted up supers when I've done a demonstration or been at somebody else's bees, lift up the supers, and the bees come roaring out underneath and sting me, and they always sting me just above the knees, which can be quite painful. So a little bit of smoke underneath, obviously smoke over the top of the put the queen excluder back, smoke over the top of the frame, put the queen excluder back, a little bit of smoke again, smoke underneath, and then put your supers back. If you've got Hoffman frames, which a lot of people do these days, I don't particularly like them, but it doesn't matter. If you want Hoffman frames, then have Hoffman frames. They won't do you any harm. Then use a division board. This is called a division board, not a dummy frame. A dummy frame is the same width as a frame. It is literally a dummy frame. And the reason is that you get a gap down the side with Hoffman's, and if you leave it, what will happen is the outside frame, they'll either build wider or they'll fill it up with comb. So make sure you fill up with a dummy frame. Why is that? Well, Hoffman frames are 35 millimeters wide, not 38 millimeters as the standard narrow spacing is. And if you're interested, and I'm going to tell you anyway, the reason for that is 35 millimeters is metricated 1 3/8 inches, and which was mainly adopted by the Americans. 38 millimeters is metricated 1.5 inches, which was adopted by the British. And as Hoffman spacers are an American invention, that's why you've got 35 millimeters. Now, strangely enough, Dayton hives, which use Hoffman spacers, are American, and they're actually 38 millimeters, but that's only a little bit by the side. Now, because of 35, you can get 12 frames in a brood chamber, which a lot of people think, oh, that's good, I'll get an extra frame of brood. That's instead of the usual 11, by the way. Now, of course, the problem is because there's no extra space, what you end up doing is rolling bees, because you can't create space to get the or extra space to get the frame out. So you very often end up rolling bees. So simply just putting in that a division board avoids that, and it'll avoid you having a lot of problems in your beekeeping. When you're doing your hive inspections, there are certain things you can do which will make it easy for you, which you aren't very often told in the teaching classes. And here are some good points here. I do use this slide quite a bit because it's the only one I've got that shows quite a lot of points. Try and keep your hive tool in your hand if you can, because it's surprising how often you actually need it for all sorts of things. Could be digging wax moth larvae out of frames, all sorts of things like that. Perhaps cleaning off propolis off the side of the box, off the inside of the box. So keep it in your hand. It's no real problem. I encourage people to put a smoker between their knees. Now, I know that's created an awful lot of fuss with a few beekeepers, but if it's between your knees, it's there all the time. If you put it down on the ground or be on the hive behind you or whatever, it's very difficult to find. And if you need a smoker, you need it within a split second, not wait 10 minutes for the time you find the smoker and find it's gone out. And if you've got it between your knees, it's so easy to do. Just grip it by the bellows. You won't burn yourself, or I don't burn myself anyway. Point contact again. This is with WBC, but that's fine. They still work, and you can do that okay. Until you find your queen, see your queen, hold the frame above the brood chamber, because it is possible for her, especially in a little clump of bees, it is possible for the queen to drop off. And I have seen people spin right round to have a look at something to get the sun, perhaps, or a ray of sun, a shaft of light into the bottom of cells. Queen drop off down here somewhere, put the hive back, and of course she can't get back. Uncluttered round the feet, which I've mentioned elsewhere. There's a queen excluder. I know you can't see it very well at all, but I tend to put the queen excluder down at the front. That way you don't forget putting it back. Some people put it on top of the supers. I haven't got a problem with that, as long as you don't put it down behind you and then put the supers back and then think, oh, blow, I've left the queen excluder out. Make sure the entrance is clear as well. So if you've got people with you, as here, this was actually well, we used to call them bee crawls, which we ran like a pub crawl. We went around and saw our various members, and this was one Jane there, there were her bees, and this was the rest of our lot looking on from behind. Much better doing it like that than standing in front of the hive. You disorientate the bees, you end up with bees all over your backs, and it causes a few problems. Make sure your back's straight as well. And so often I see beekeepers handling their bees, they're bent over. Your back very soon aches, so making it uncomfortable. And again, supers covered exactly the same as that slide I showed you about 3 or 4 slides ago. Now you'll have queen cells, and don't think you won't, because you will. Sooner or later you'll get queen cells in your hive, and you might think, that's a nice colony, I'll try and use some. Well, if you cut out queen cells, try to make sure you cut out a fairly big piece of comb. All of those will be quite good. I don't think there'll be a problem. They all look quite nice cells to me. The only slight problem might be that there are 4 cells of chalk brood there, which you might think, chalk brood, perhaps I shouldn't be raising queens from that. That's entirely up to you. Richard, I'm sorry, I've got to back out of this for a minute or two. I'll tell you why. I'll feel a migraine coming on, and I just want to go and grab a couple of tablets of aspirin, if you don't mind.
Okay, no problem. I'll keep
only be a
busy.
minute or two.
You're all right. Sorry about this, everybody, but we need to make sure Roger's okay. While we're waiting for Roger, there are a few questions that have come through. I will pose these to Roger because I know that's who you've come to hear speak. But there are one or two which I can perhaps cover. First one from Hazel: how do you stop or get rid of the black stuff that gums up the smoker? Well, I in the past have used a wire brush, but also the washing soda also eats away at that black crud as well. So you could try doing that. Roger, you okay?
I hope so. Yeah, give us. It usually takes about quarter an hour, 20 minutes if I can get a couple of aspirins inside me quick. Okay, right. Let's plug on. Yeah, chalk brood. If you've got quite a lot of chalk brood, I probably wouldn't raise queens from that colony. But if they happen to be the only ones, then I wouldn't bother too much about it. I put the slide up because I like this one because although it's obviously poor comb, the queen cells are really, really good. So cut them out with plenty of comb on. And this is one of the questions that I get asked an awful lot. How do I put queen cells into another colony? And it's something that isn't taught very often at beekeeping associations. It's certainly taught at mine. I hope it's taught at Barnsley. And then where do you put them in the other hive, the one you're going to? Well, if you've got a gap in the frame, then use that. If not, you've got to make something. And this one isn't a good example, but it was done for a demonstration at one of the beekeeping associations that I was invited to demonstrate at. So all I do is just push my thumb into the comb. It needs to be in the brood area where there's brood. Occasionally you get a situation where all the brood's gone. Well, then you've got to select an area where the brood would normally be, which is nice and easy to find out. So I push my thumb in right down to the midrib and then draw it down a bit so that I end up with a depression like that I can just put the queen cell in and then push it in by that big piece of a comb that I just showed you. So that's what you end up with, queen cell there. Now on this particular comb, I could have put it in there. And this is the front of the hive. You can tell because of this this gap here, and the food's up the back. So that was run the so-called cold way, with this at the back of the hive and this at the front. Now, a lot of people will think, well, yeah, but it's cold by the entrance. Well, yeah, but they got brood round, so there really is no problem. So that's it. When you see queen cells, they can be in varying states. The one on the left here has been emerged. Yep, because what the bees do is they thin down the outside, so they take all the wax off it right down to the cocoon, so that the queen can chew all the way around, and that ends up, or not quite all the way around, that ends up with a little lid which is almost hinged, and she then emerges into the colony, and that's it. She's left it. Now, what very often happens is that a worker bee goes inside, cleans out the residual royal jelly that's at the back, and I don't know how or why they do it, but the other bees push the lid back on and sort of partly seal round there to leave the worker bee in there. Why they do that, I've absolutely no idea. It just doesn't make sense to us. But don't forget, we are only humans, and I say only humans because bees know exactly what they're doing, because they've been doing it for millions of years. Now, the problem with that is that at a glance, it can look as if the queen cell hasn't emerged, but very, very often you open these out and there's a dead worker in upside down. So if you've only got sealed queen cells, just touch the tip with your finger or your hive tool, and this lid comes away very, very easily. So just tip them. So that is that side. That's one option. Another option is that if the bees decide that they don't want all the queen cells, what they do is they tear them down. Now, in the end here, there's a thicker cocoon than there is up the top. So the bees obviously know this, and they don't try and bite the queen cell down here. They go in the top, whereas obviously thinner cocoon, or perhaps no cocoon at all, and then just chew up the contents and clear it out. So that's if you see that, I know I've seen it in print and heard it that other virgin queens do that, but I'm pretty certain it's the workers, because this can happen when you haven't got any virgin queens in the colony. Varroa cycle, life cycle, is, in my opinion, very important. A lot of beekeepers, they treat for Varroa or do some management technique that they're told to do, and they just do it without understanding what they're trying to achieve, which very often ends up in failure. So I think it's important that we know the life cycle, but it's not as clear cut as you might think. If you look on various websites and publications, you'll find it's actually quite contradictory. So what I'm going to tell you here, I've gleaned from several sources, the ones that I think are probably the most authoritative ones. The female mite enters the brood cell prior to capping. We don't really know, but we think it's within 24 hours of capping. She will then hide under the larva in the brood food. Don't worry, she can still breathe. She waits there until the larva's consumed all the food and the cell is sealed. She then starts laying eggs, the first of which is apparently always a male, but I did come across one source that said the first one is female, second one is male, and then subsequently all female. Now, I don't know what evidence there is for that, or even the what I just told you, because don't forget, for 40 or 50 years, we thought that bees fed on hemolymph. It's only the last 3 or 4 years that we found out that they don't feed on hemolymph. They feed on fat body tissue. So, you know, it's some of these things that can only be found out in a scientific manner. We've got to go on what the scientists tell us until we're told differently. Now, every 20 to 30 hours, and I did see down as low as 11 hours late, the female lays an egg. There's a gap of 20 or 30 hours. The male mates with his sisters in the cell, and then subsequently dies in the cell as well. So you've got real inbreeding there. The female mites emerge with the bee, and then they hitch a ride on the adult bees. We used to call it phoretic stage, but a phoretic stage is now really the wrong terminology, because it's now known that they do feed on the bees as well. They get between the plates on the underside of the abdomen. So that is, I think, quite important to learn. I've got it on Dave Cushman's website. That may well be changed over the years. I don't really know, but that's what we know at the moment. Now, there's something called under-supering and over-supering, which is actually, in a lot of instances, the wrong terminology. Under-supering and over-supering are terms that have been used for well over 100 years, but they've got taken on a modern meaning. I think probably because we've got newer people coming to beekeeping that don't understand the old terminology. So a lot of people these days think under-supering is to put a super underneath the existing brood chamber for wintering. That is not under-supering. This is what under-supering is. It's where the hive needs another super and you put the new super, the empty one, underneath the existing supers. Over-supering is where you put it over the top. And it's been that terminology for over 100 years. Not for wintering, under-supering on the left, over-supering on the right. Also, it's not under-supering meaning not giving enough supers and over-supering giving too many, which I've also seen in print. It's just terminology that has been used for years and years and years. And a load of new people come into beekeeping, misinterpret it, and then, of course, you end up with a different meaning. Fairly early on in your beekeeping, you'll probably be involved in making frames. Now, you make them exactly how you like. It doesn't bother me at all. I know some people get very sort of almost paranoid about it. But there's the bottom corner of the frame with the two bottom bars in. And a lot of people nail in that way. In fact, that's the way, the so-called official way. And the reason is that, or the reason given is that you can remove the bottom bars to clean the frames. Well, then you speak to people and they say, oh, well, I don't bother with cleaning frames. I burn them because they're so cheap anyway. So it knocks that reason into the ditch. But what I've found on many occasions is you end up, excuse me, end up with that. There's the bottom bar left behind. And because the nail is driven in straight, of course, it's easy to come out. Why is the bottom bar there? Well, of course, the bees have decided they're going to glue it down. So the super's been taken off and bottom bar's left behind. So what I do is I nail down through that way, such as like so. And my bottom, I don't have problems with my bottom bars coming out. Some people don't quite drive the nail home. So if they want to take the bars out, all they do is just pull the nail out and away they go. And the so-called official way, I've even been told by several people that when they're on the BBKA basic and they've got to make a frame, the assessor has told them that they've got to take it to bits and make it so-called properly. Well, that's not a very good way of doing things, in my opinion. You may have heard of premium and standard foundation. Why is it premium? Why is it standard? Well, what's the difference? Well, premium is made from wax that's sourced from either the UK or approved countries. Now, some of it may not be from our own type of honeybees, but other kinds of honeybees. That's fine if it's proper beeswax. But there is, I understand, I have no proof, but I understand there's quite a bit of adulteration with some of this stuff that you tend to buy off the internet. Standard is waxed sourced from anywhere. So it might perhaps contain more pesticide residues or whatever. I don't know. I wouldn't make any more comment than that because I don't want to get it wrong and I don't want to mislead you. You'll occasionally come across, this is a beekeeper. That is brood, but it doesn't look right. It's got dome cappings and the cells are longer than they should be. What is it? It's a drone laying queen. She's simply run out of sperm, can't lay fertile eggs, so lays infertile eggs, which of course turn into drones. So what can you do about that? I've had so many people say, oh, I'll keep the queen just to see if she improves. She won't improve. She cannot go out, get mated again. You might just as well find her and put your hoof on her, give her the boot treatment, because if not, she can cause you all sorts of problems. Now, because you've got something in there that the bees think is a good queen, you can actually introduce another one. It might be better to leave it a few hours, but I'm not talking about queen introduction here. Or perhaps, especially if you get towards the end of the season, unite it to a queen right colony. Now, you may have what look like queen cells. Don't use them, because every time I've come across those, yes, they do look like decent queen cells, but every time they got drones in them. If they've got those queen cell lookalikes and you've only got queen cells, you can usually get away by just putting a queen cell in there. But don't forget, of course, that you've lost quite a lot of a brood. Now, despite what you're told regularly, I've always found that you can reuse a comb. The thinking is that the cells have got bigger, therefore you can't use them. But I've never had a problem. I know some people chuck the combs away, but there's no need to. Honey processing. Sooner or later, you're going to need to do that. But personally, I think processing is probably not a good word. 20, 30 years ago, no problem at all. But processing these days gives people the idea that something nasty's been done to it to make it keep or make it taste better or whatever. So perhaps we ought, as beekeepers, ought to find a different word for it. What I really mean is from hive to jar, which there's quite a lot happens, extracting the strain in all sorts of things like that, including settling to get the air bubbles to rise to the top. What you got to remember, folks, is that right from the hive to the mouth, honey is actually food. So look after it. Make sure that there's no contaminants or anything that comes anywhere near it. Now, it does need care and it does need skill as well. And I'm afraid there are more and more, I'm afraid, but there are more and more people who aren't bothered, or coming into beekeeping, who aren't bothered about the honey. They're just interested in the bees. That's absolutely fine. I haven't got a problem with that. But if you are extracting your honey, there's several things that you need to do to make it easy for yourself. One of those things is to carefully select your equipment. Okay, you're only going to use it for a day or two a year, but you might as well get something, buy something or acquire it that is fit for the purpose and good for the job. A lot of beekeeping associations loan equipment out. That's fine, providing it's looked after, it's cleaned, it's when you start and finish, and you send it back in exactly the same condition as you got it, and not with nuts and bolts missing and screens and lids and all sorts of things like that missing. If you're going to buy your own, go and have a look at it first, because you may find that something suits your situation better than something else. Don't just go and buy a uncapping knife or whatever, because there are 2 or 3 different kinds, and get them in your hand. Make sure that you're comfortable with them. Avoid spreading honey. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Some beekeepers do get in a dreadful mess. Yes, honey is sticky, but all you need is something like a damp cloth with cold water, not warm, cold water, or an old flannel or something like that, and just continually wipe your hands, and you won't get honey all over the house or all over the shed or wherever you, or garage or wherever you extract your honey. Be aware that robbing can go on. Now, it's not just going to be bees, it could be wasps as well. And wasps are much sharper than bees at finding places in. So they're the ones that go underneath the doors, through the keyholes, all sorts of things like that. If perhaps you're doing your extracting in the kitchen, don't leave the doors and windows open. Yes, it might be a hot day, but if you do, the bees very soon get a sniff of it. And if you happen to be extracting when there's a nectar dearth, of course, it isn't very long before you get a little bit of help. It only takes one bee to go back to tell its sisters or half sisters that, oh, there's those 3 supers of honey that we had a couple of years ago. I know where they are. And, you know, once you get that sort of thing, you've got a problem. If you get bees inside, don't just chuck them out. Sorry, folks, squash them, because they'll go back home and you'll end up with far more deaths than that one that you squashed. And it gives you an opportunity to prepare your combs for next season. Now, I know a lot of people think, oh, I'm not going to bother with that. It's 6 or 8 months away, but you can do things which will make things easier for next year. This is a neat little uncapping tray. We got a couple of these at Whisper Green. I believe they're made in Scandinavia somewhere, but I'm not sure. And what you end up is a plastic container with a metal strainer inside, and this is where the cappings go. And you uncap into there, and here behind you see the lid. That's like a tray. I'll show you that in a minute. But all you do is basically uncap and stack the uncapped combs on there until you've got an extractor full. Here is a comb being prepared. That's not me, by the way, but what I do is just run the uncapping knife down the top of the frame. If you do the same with the bottom, it's nice and easy then, because your wax is soft. The wax goes into the strainer here. It can be melted down. You saved all your wax, and what it's done is it's prepared your combs for next season. You haven't got to do any winter work. Now, this running the knife down the bottom, that needs to be free of anything that hold it up, such as these wires that people insist on poking through the bottom bars. These incidentally show that the foundation was put in upside down, but don't worry about that. The thing to do is to tuck these inside here so that you can just run your knife straight down there. And then uncap nice and straight. Try and get your cappings in one hit if you possibly can. If you can't, as you can see, there's a bit of a lull there. Then dig that out with the tip of your knife. Make sure that you don't go straight up with a knife and cut yourself there. I never have, but I know other people have. And in fact, somebody designed something that goes over the end to stop it happening. Well, it's another piece of kit that, well, to a degree, you don't really need, you could do without. So if you can't uncap it all, just dig the knife underneath and just uncap. And that should uncap your combs nice and straight, much straighter than people if they use a heat gun, because then all that does is replicate the wavy comb for next year, and you end up with the same problem next year. Okay, here's the lid, and these are not the normal size, normal type of frames that I've just shown you. These are what are called Mandy frames. They're self-spacing, but that's only a minor point. But you can stack the combs up until you've got an extractor load, and any drips are in on the tray. Everything should be nice and clean and tidy. And when you extract, you can filter cold or strain cold. I prefer to use the term strain than filter, because filter again gives the impression that it's force filtered, as commercial honey is, takes out the a lot of pollen grains and that sort of thing. So I prefer straining, which you can do easily through a nylon straining cloth. But what I find is that, well, it's a fact anyway, that if you just warm honey a little bit, and I don't mean heat, I mean just warm, just put a few degrees into it, it flows so much easier, and it's much easier to strain and a lot quicker as well. So then you can just put that on a low heat on well, I've got a little electric cooker, and I don't know what there is, probably 15 pound of honey in that one, might be 20 in that one. Just gently warm it up. You only put a couple of 3 degrees into it. Just get it a little bit above room temperature, and it will strain ever so easy. Now there are these days only really two kinds of extractor. What's called a radial extractor, where the cage inside the extractor allows the frames to go radially, pointing in towards the center. Now with those, the smallest one available is 9 frame. Now 9 frame is about 1 super full. So if you've only got a couple of 3 hives, if you're not careful, about half a dozen loads of the extractor, and you've done all your extracting. These things are actually quite big. They're quite expensive. You use them 2 days a year. Well, not always that time. So you might as well have a smaller extractor for a smaller beekeeper. Something like this is handy for if you've got perhaps 20 colonies or even more. Now with the radial extractor, it actually extracts both sides of the comb at the same time. But I think, as I said, I think it's probably too large for a small beekeeper, but an extractor seems to be one of those things that some beekeepers seem to think is a status symbol, and the bigger and gleamier it is, the better. That's that. The tangential extractor, there are different kinds. This one's got 3 sides. Some of them got 2, some have got 4. They do vary, but what happens is the comb goes in like that. So you spin it to get rid of most of this side of the comb. Then you've got to turn the comb over to spin the other side out. And the technique is that you spin the first side fairly slowly. So you probably get rid of half to 3/4 of the honey, or extract it, not rather get rid of it. Then turn it round, extract the other side, and then you can go at a higher speed and then go back and do the first side again. And they're really quite efficient. They get most of your honey extracted, but it is a little bit more involved than the radio extractor. But even when I had 130 colonies, I still used this extractor because it suited me. And in fact, that one has extracted an awful lot of honey. This particular one takes 6 shallows or 3 brood. That's obviously just dropped in there so you can see where the frames go. but you get 2 shallows in there, or one brood on each of 3 sides. Suits a small beekeeper, and even as I say, 130 colonies I extracted my honey with that. You have to turn the frames around, but it's no real problem. Now, this is the sort of extractor that a beekeeping association may loan. Some of them hire. They charge £3, £4, £5 or whatever each time, which of course ends up buying new equipment for the next lot, or when it wears out. So they are honey extractors. What do you do with your cappings if you want to clean them? Well, ever so many people have done this. They thought, all I've got to do is put it in the feeder, and the bees will come out and clean it out. Yes, they do, and they make a really good job of it. But then they, for some reason, and again, I don't know why, they tend to build comb inside, and they do a really good job of it. But they always do that, and I don't know why they do it. But there's no real problem. You've got to clean it out, but that's no problem. When you're handling your bees, you need to be aware of what's on the combs. So does anyone give you, anyone see anything on there? I'll tell you what, I'll give you about 10 minutes. Okay? Well, some of you have probably seen this, because when you shake the bees off, have a look in this area down here. What we got a queen cell underneath. That can cause you a lot of problems, because if you miss it when you're going through checking for queen cells, somebody else has got a chimney full of bees that they don't want, and you're asked to get rid of them. So shake the bees off. I like to shake across the frames like this on the top. I've seen queens killed, I think I can remember, on 5 occasions. 2 of them were on the same day by demonstrators that came into our teaching apiary at Whisper Green, shook down inside the box like some people do, and if the queen happens to be on the outside of the frame here, of course, gets shaken down in there, she gets maimed or killed. And yeah, 2 of them I saw on one day. So I now do not, and I tell everybody else off, certainly at Whisper Green, who does it that way. If they want to do it with their own bees, they can do exactly as they like. But if you shake crossways, it gives you maximum area. If the queen happens to be on there, then she'll go down on the top. Getting near the end now, folks. Detection is a great thing in beekeeping, and you do it in conjunction with observation. Now, you can very often see things on a frame that some, what I call the gawkers, just don't see at all. You can pick up quite a bit by just looking at that frame. So what do we got? Whoops. Right. Underneath is clean. There's no comb at all. This is not actually my comb, by the way. It's one of somebody else's. I think at a teaching apiary where I did some demonstrating. All right. There's no comb underneath. That tells me that that hive probably had what's called a shallow floor, because the bees can climb onto the comb without any problems. If it's a deep floor, they build comb underneath or on the floor so they can climb up onto the comb. That's one thing. And by the way, folks, I'm feeling much better now. So thanks for letting me go and get the aspirins. All right, we got a hole there, which could be caused by almost anything, but there's a clue coming up. Incidentally, don't worry about holes in combs, because bees in a natural nest in a tree or a building or something like that always have holes in combs. I think they're using it for to get around the nest more efficiently, and also for communication too. So perhaps bees are communicating through pheromones and food sharing and all sorts of things like that. So I know some people, as soon as the bees start putting holes in combs, oh, out, 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 you know, got to get rid of them. Inefficient. It's not inefficient. It's probably actually more efficient. You can see that you've got a thin area there. When it's because it's light, it's dark around here. That tends to suggest to me that that's new comb. Why might it be new comb? Sorry, folks, as the aspirin's getting hold of me. Well, that whole area, in fact, looks like it's new comb. My guess is, but I don't know, that there was, because that is more likely to have more brooding, the cell walls were thicker. My guess is, but I don't know, that at some stage was a lot of greater wax moth in there, which somebody's ripped out and just put the frame back. And that, I think, is the reason for that. It's only my guess because, as I say, it wasn't my comb. All right, we've got nectar up in the top here, which is what you'd expect, because food above the brood, not below. You've got a little bit of a mishmash here. Looks like drone there, and somewhat are called, if you can see them, what are called transition cells here. Now, transition cells are where you go from, or the bees go from worker cells to drone cells. Sometimes you get them even five-sided sometimes. In fact, some of those there may well be five-sided. They're odd shapes. You've got drone brood there, tending to suggest that at some stage that was just a hole and the bees built whatever they want. The worker brood there all looks a pretty good pattern. Yes, you get a few dotted ones here, but it could well have been that when the queen was laying on there, laying on that comb is what I really mean, then you might have had pollen or perhaps nectar in these holes. But you can tell that perhaps the queen is doing okay. I say it was because you've got emergency cells here. And for some reason, you've got unsealed emergency cells there, where everything else apart from that one is are unsealed. You've got younger brood there. So it's looking as if that's probably expanding in the spring. And you've got two roughly equal areas of honey there, sealed honey. That is almost certain that that colony has run the so-called warm way, because if it had been the cold way and you'd had the entrance down here, you probably wouldn't have had this lot here. All the food would have been at the back. So you can actually tell quite a lot from just one comb. You can read it and you can tell the sort of things that are happening. I'm going to play a few tricks on you folk, because here is another one, and you can tell quite a lot by this frame, and it's quite a bit different than the other one. If you get the entrance in the front of a comb, very often you get this gap down at the front of the entrance, which you don't really get at the back. They started filling up. My guess is that that frame at some stage has been turned around, but at the moment, it's fairly certain this is where the entrance is here. We've got no food here, but the food's at the back, tending to confirm that the entrance is down here. Again, we've got no, this is one of my combs, by the way. Again, we've got no a comb underneath, so that's got a shallow floor. That hive's got a shallow floor. That area there looks as if it hasn't been used for some time. The only likelihood of that in a colony is early in the year where it's come to the winter. So it's beginning to look a little bit like this comb's photograph was taken in the spring sometime. That brood there would have emerged, otherwise you wouldn't have got this around it. So it's looking as if perhaps that was the first wave that the queen laid. It's emerged, probably eggs and young larvae in there. And the queen then, the colony's built up, the queen's laid outside. That brood all looks pretty good, so you can reckon that the queen's quite good. That colony looks like it's expanding in the spring. Confirmation because the queen has then laid outside there. You've got pollen in the brood area here, which suggests that perhaps there hasn't been a super put on early enough. Bees have got to put the pollen somewhere, so of course they put it in amongst the brood. So I'm fairly certain that's an expanding colony in the spring, and it's the sort of thing that you can use as a local beekeeping association as a quiz question, for a winter meeting or something like that. So, observation, what do you folks see here? I'll give you a few seconds just to have a look. Richard's got it right, but he's probably seen this one before. Well, there's the queen there. Hang on a minute. There's another one there. There's two queens. Look, how far away are they from each other? Half an inch? Are they fighting? No, they're not. The chances are they're mother and daughter. It's surprising how often during the summer you'll see two queens in a hive, and you think, "Oh, I've got a queen. I'll clip and mark her," and you might then see another one. It's surprising how often. So all the people that well, not all of them, but some of them give the courses, especially if they're not very experienced. There's only one queen in a hive. Oh no, there isn't. There can often be more than that. What have we got down here? So those of you who've been to some of my other presentations will know that. That is two bees feeding each other. Could be that one is transferring food over, could be a forager transferring it to a house bee, or it could be what's called trophallaxis, call it what you like, which is part of the food sharing, food transfer pool that you get inside a hive. But that's not finishing, because it's looking very much as if there's some up there involved as well. And if you look around a bit more, there's another lot there. So all this here in a very short area. You never saw any of that in books, did you? You saw it because you saw the comb. This is less than a quarter of one side of a frame, so less than an eighth of a frame, and there's probably other things that are going on there at all. There it is, folks, all in front of you, all the time. If you don't oversmoke a colony, you don't smash the cohesion of a colony to bits, you can see all these things are happening. But of course, you need the observation, which is a really good learning tool. Here's some healthy brood here. You've got seal brood there, which all looks pretty good. The only holes really are that one there and that one there, and I'll talk about them in a little bit. And you've got unsealed brood down here, and that all looks pretty good as well. So if you've got sealed brood, make sure the cappings are domed outwards, not depressed, with no jagged holes. No jagged holes. Especially with brood cells, if you get jagged holes that are off center, you can be certain there's something wrong with it. If they're regular and in the center as those two are there, then they're both being sealed. If they're jagged, the bees are detected as a problem with them, and they're just going to hoof the contents out. Now, they look dry. If they look greasy, it could possibly be American foul brood. Not always likely to be, but it could possibly be American foul brood, which is one of the notifiable diseases. When you get brood that's filling the cells like this, that's when you're likely to see the possibility of European foul brood. Don't worry too much, because the vast majority of beekeepers will never ever see foul brood, but you need to know it and be able to recognize it. So think about it: unsealed brood, white, bright, and curled up tight. If it's not one of those, you've got a problem. So if it loses its color, it hasn't got this glistening, as some people call it, pearly white stage. So if it goes a sort of creamy yellow color, watch out. There's something going on. It may not be too serious, but you need to know what it is. If it loses its segments or its shape, then watch out. Oh yeah, I've got those. Yeah, sorry about that, folks. Now, if you've got holes in brood cappings like this, so it's a bit jagged, perhaps off center, that was in Ireland. I did a demonstration there. That was actually a colony. It was quite badly infected with chalk brood. So that's what that is. So that's brood. Same thing happens with food cells. This is nectar here that hasn't yet been ripened. This is honey up here, which has been ripened and it's been sealed. And of course, the interim stage is where it's getting sealed. Look, that's nice and round as well. No problem with that. But if you get food like this, where you get jagged holes in, like so, perhaps off center, it's probably robbers that are just going in to grab what they can and out again, usually. That's it, folks. Sorry I had to leave you part way through, but I feel an awful lot better now, and I should be ready and raring to go for the other group that come in later. Incidentally, even though you may have only just started keeping bees, the later one is for next group up. It'd still be quite useful to you. So, any questions, please?
Excellent. How do you stop or get rid of the black stuff that gums up the smoker?
You can't. Well, hang on. Let's get out of this from Richard. Yeah. You can't really stop it. It's basically soot, just like you get in a chimney. You just got to clean it out every so often with a hive tool. That's what I do. Sorry, I don't use a J-type hive tool. I use the one with a bent end, and I find that's good. I've got stainless steel smoker, and I find it actually comes off quite easy. If you've got one of the old galvanized ones, that might not be quite so easy, but I think overall it's easy enough to do. Yep. Next one, please.
What's the best thing to do with the holes in the crown board?
Oh, do what I did. I showed you. I'll cover them up with a little bit of wood.
Can I ask Roger what he thinks about hygienic bees instead of Varroa treatments?
Instead of, oh, right. Yeah. I've always, ever since Varroa came about, I've always thought if you keep zapping things, then you're never ever going to build up resistance. So I'm very firmly in favor of breeding bees. They might not be hygienic. They might not be, but breeding bees that are resistant, resilient, or whatever. Having said that, I've taken quite a hit this year, and I'm quite happy. Well, I'm not happy to admit it, but I'm quite open about it. I could just keep quiet about it. I've what I found was that the colonies were really strong in early December, and now they're dead. Well, yeah, some of them died actually quite quickly. So I think for the ordinary beekeeper, I think to expect them to try and breed from their most resistant colonies, I think is asking an awful lot. I think we've got to have overall a proper management system nationwide, not just locally, because my local association has taken quite a hammering, and you think, oh, everything's going on okay, and then all of a sudden, down they go. So yeah, you want me to carry on, don't you? Yeah, I don't think we've got too many of the answers yet. It might seem to be okay. Oh yeah, if you lose a few, raise queens from what's left. I don't think it's quite as simple as that, because there's all sorts of things that go on. You may have an apiary. I don't quite know if I'm going to put this in the right way or not. You might have an apiary, so let's say 10 colonies that are all fairly equal in their resistance. But one colony or two colonies, you lose most of them, but two colonies do quite well the following spring, and you think, oh, they're the ones to breed from. It could be something simple like you had a brood break the previous summer, which all it did, it was just delayed everything. And you're misinterpreting the answer. So I think we need to do something on an organised basis. Yes, we're going to lose colonies. Of course, it's aggravated by keep bringing in stuff from outside, because that's definitely not helping. Because I don't think other people are perhaps quite so fussy about their Varroa tolerance as we are. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm not being evasive, Richard, but I'd much rather the bees dealt with it themselves than keep treating or using management techniques to get over it. Of course, going back 30 years, I'd much rather the Varroa mites didn't come in the first place, which of course is down to importation again. And if we're not careful, we'll end up with exactly the same thing with small hive beetle and tropilelaps. And I asked the people's 116 people, whatever it is, watching here, ask them if they know anything about tropilelaps, and I'd be surprised if more than 10% do. We don't seem to try and find out enough about these things, and if they come in, if tropilelaps comes in, it'll come in on bees, I think, from what I can understand.
Dr. Samuel Ramsey says, tropilelaps makes Varroa look like a walk in the park in terms of management. He's the one that found out that Varroa don't feed on hemolymph.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And, he's looked at them in Hawaii, and he's scared by them.
Well, I've never seen tropilelaps, but I've seen small hive beetle in the States, and if you see a comb, it's absolutely wriggly with maggots. You won't have anything to do with importation again. But yeah, that's another issue for another day, I'm afraid. But I suppose we've still got the threats. Anyway, carry on. Yep.
Clive wants to know, when setting up a bait hive, would it help to put in a frame of honey from a disease-free colony to attract foraging bees, so that when the bees are making swarming preparations, the scout bees are aware of the existence of the location and the bait hive?
Absolutely no way. What will happen is that you'll get robber bees from other colonies go in and they just rob it out.
And they might start on your colonies.
Well, no, not really. What happens is, Richard, if and this is a trick that's also not taught to people. If you've got a little bit of robbing going on, and the sort of thing that happens is you're bringing the supers indoors to extract, the phone goes, so you roar off inside and answer it, and you come back, and it's not very long before you've got a bit of help. The robbers are there. If you move the source away and then just put a little bit of honey left, so on a sauce or a little bit like that, once the bees clean it up, they seem to be satisfied. But if you move the source away, they'll be hunting around for more. So I don't always think that if you've got a sort of robbing situation, that they're always looking for more. Okay,
that's a good tip in itself.
Oh yeah. But this is the sort of stuff that isn't taught to beekeepers, really. I mean, I know it because I've always taught it by old beekeepers, but you never see that in. I don't think you see it in books.
I was actually thinking when you were talking, it's an understated title for this lecture for today, because I've been making a list of all the things that you've talked about. You know, beekeeping books, smoker tips, managing the colony, hive inspections, Varroa. You know, there's all sorts in there.
You don't believe all that old rubbish there?
God.
How gullible.
Which supering do you recommend, under or over, when you're putting on a super?
In normal circumstances, underneath, because bees do what are called chimneying. So if you put one super on, I can't really describe. If you put one super on, the bees will go up to the middle and then they move outwards. If you put another super on, either or underneath, they'll do what's called chimney. They go straight up to the middle. And then if you don't put any more on, then they'll go out. But if you put another one on top of that, they go straight up to the middle. So you can, if you put too many supers on, perhaps it's not a good year or it's a weaker colony or something like that, they will literally go straight up to the middle, because that's what they do in nature. Because don't forget, the only reason the bees are putting honey in comb and then sealing it is for when they haven't got any, which is either going to be a nectar dearth, which you occasionally get during the summer, or during the winter, and they just go straight up through munch all the way. They don't go outwards. Okay, that hasn't quite answered the question, I know, but if I take the supers, let's say I've got two supers on, if I take them off and I think, cool, I could do with another one, I'll just move them to one side. I haven't got to take the crown board off. I then put the other one on top of the brood or top of the queen excluder, put the others back on top. And that's how I do it. I know some people put it on top, but at the end of the day, I don't think it matters too much at all. I remember years and years ago, there was a county bee instructor for East Sussex, and his name was Wilkins. And he said that he always put his new supers, underneath the old ones, because it's less distance for the bees to go to put the honey in the supers. I was thinking to myself, well, hang on a minute, they've flown 1.5 miles to get this stuff. What difference does 6 inches make when they get back? But I heard him say it 2 or 3 times, and if that's what he thought, fine, no trouble at all. Apart from that, I think he was a good beekeeper. So I generally put them underneath, and I haven't got to remove the crown board.
Yeah. Douglas says, when you were looking at the picture with the bottom bar stuck to the top of the frames.
Oh, yeah.
Could you please talk about the importance of bee space? Not many teachers do.
Right. Bee space is a gap. And if you measure a natural gap, and I've done it many times in a natural nest, it does vary between about 6 millimeters and 10 millimeters. And it's okay, it's 4 millimeters, but it is actually quite critical. If you've got boxes that are a little bit too shallow, or you make the side boxes, the sideboards of the boxes too far apart or too close, the bees will usually fill the gap up. That particular one, I remember what he's saying. That one looks very much as if the box might have been shallower than it should be, which is absolutely typical of what happens when people make their own boxes. They just copy something which may well have been a copy of something else, and it's only a millimeter out, a couple of millimeters out. There aren't too many millimeters in 6 millimeters, so somebody copies and copies and copies. It is actually quite important. These days, I think with modern machinery, there isn't that much of a problem. I know I shouldn't say this, but I believe the manufacturers these days don't let timber season as they used to. Obviously, it puts price in, I think, but I'm not sure. They make them a little bit bigger and then expect them to shrink down to size. But I don't know. Perhaps if they're not shrinking, if they shrink too much or not enough, perhaps that makes a difference. That might be correct with the seconds. What happens with the premium quality, I've no idea. I don't know. But I was told that that's what they do. If you think about it, there's a lot of material must go through the beehive works. Look at the stuff that gets sold. There's monumental quantities of it. Unless it's kiln dried or whatever, I don't think they can let that lot season traditionally. Yep.
I'm going to put the next two questions together. And Maria and Heather, you're asking the right man. What are the pros and cons of using castellated spacers in brood boxes? You do use castellated spacers in brood boxes, don't you?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I've used them for over 50 years. Right. You've got to look at all the different kinds of spacers as to there aren't any real good points. Some quite bad points with all of them, and it's the ones with the least bad points that I'm interested in, because you basically got three methods or three standard methods these days of used to be four, but there's now only three of spacing. That's the Hoffman spacers, which are the self-spacing ones that I showed you. They were invented back into the 19th century in the States. And the reason they were invented was because of the short lug frames that are used in the States at the time. We have at that time, we had long lugs for our standard frames. So that allowed us to use two kinds of spacers. One was what were called WBC metal ends, which are now equivalent to plastic ends, which you actually push on the ends of the lugs. There was another one called a Yorkshire spacer, which I think they still occasionally supply, but I haven't seen any of those new for a long time. I've seen them in the Isle of Man quite a bit, but not here. I haven't even seen them in Yorkshire, and you didn't even know they existed, did you?
Well, I know because of the Dave Cushman website, but I've never seen them.
Yeah. Okay. So you get those, and you get the castellated spacers, which these days is just a straight piece of strip with slots in, so you can take the frames. Now, I don't particularly like the Hoffman spacers because they do get gummed up. They use more wood, which I'd prefer not to use. Okay, it's sort of sustainable forests these days, but it's more effort, more waste, which I don't like. Sorry, are they asking brood chambers alone or throughout?
They asked about brood chambers.
Oh, brood chambers, yeah, okay. So they're also 35 millimeters rather than 38. Now, I may be wrong, but I've noticed that where you get colonies with Hoffman spacers, tend to get more chronic bee paralysis virus. Now, I don't know the reason other than the gap between the combs is closer, and it may just be the bees are rubbing because it's 3 millimeters closer. It may just be that the bees are rubbing against each other. I don't know. Right. Metal and plastic ends. Metal ends, they're really good for finger removal. And in any case, there aren't many of them left. The plastic equivalent, they get horribly gummed up with propolis, and with a lot of extractors, you've actually got to take them off each year, which really is a problem. I've done it on many occasions with supers and plastic with metal ends. And then there's the castellations, which are only point contact. And I prefer those because there's less problems in my book with those than there are with the other two. Now, a lot of people, castellations in brood. Oh, no, nobody should ever use them in the brood chamber. You say, why not? Oh, well, you can't get the frame out without rolling the bees. Oh, yes, you can, because all you do is just lift it out the slot, or lift one frame out the slot, pull it towards you, do the same with the next one, and it leaves a nice gap so you can get the next frame out. So if you want to get the frame out the middle of the brood chamber, you can do that because you just move the two either side and it's done. With Hoffman's, you've got to move you've got to move half the brood chamber. So it's a different sort of technique. But certainly in my area, Whisper Green, virtually all our members use castellations with no problem at all, to the point where the bee inspectors know, or when they go around, they know who the Whisper Green members are, and the local supplier knows if people are after 11 castellations, they know where they know roughly where they live.
Excellent. Keith wants to know if we can do a webinar solely on honey processing, because he's enjoyed the bit that you've done today.
Probably better if it was a video, I would think. Yeah, probably better. In fact, we've got part of it. We just got the uncapping bit. I think we could do that this coming summer. Yeah, good idea. In fact, both BIBBA and my local association, Whisper Green, we're going to join forces, and we're going to try and get a lot of videos done this summer. And as you know, Richard, we're going to put some of them on the BIBBA website. In fact, have we started?
As in the ones that you're recording?
No, the ones that Peter Jenkins is.
No, well, they're not live to the rest of the world yet, but we are.
Okay, we'll be within couple of weeks?
Easily, yeah.
Right, okay, yeah.
That's a recommendation list of YouTube videos that we've put together, isn't it?
We found, yeah, that's right, yeah.
But we are, with your help, recording some more practical at the hive beekeeping videos, aren't we?
Yep.
Which can be useful. Yeah.
Hopefully the first one's going to be spring cleaning, but
yeah. I don't know if you'll know the answer to this one. In your presentation, the frame holder shown at extraction, do you know what brand it was?
Frame holder shown at extraction.
I don't know if it was the frames that you.
I think they probably mean where uncapping into. No, I don't. It's not mine. It belongs to the association. I believe it well, I think I mentioned it came from Scandinavia somewhere.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, just check. Where did that come from? Have a look through the catalogue, see if you can find it. It's the only one with those arms that go up, I think. Or it's the only one I've seen with those arms that go up. Yep.
Roger, did you ever use a capping scratcher to uncap frames?
No. I'll tell you why. If you uncap with a knife, most of the wax goes in the cappings. If you use anything else, like a scratcher, what you end up with is a whole load of wax going through the extractor, which has then got to get filtered out. And that's why I don't like using them. I know some people do, but that's why I don't use them. I like honey to go through the extractor, wax through the wax melter or separator or whatever you've got. Strainer.
Julie and Steve, a comment. We put holes in our comb as Roger suggested last year. The bees closed them up again.
Right. I'll tell you what I think happened. I think it was too big to start with. You want a better if you get a hole about bee space, so 8-10 millimeters, something like that, 5/16 3/8 of an inch, and then push that through. You might be able to do it with a pencil. I never thought of that. Just push a pencil straight to the comb and twist it round. And what you'll find is, I think the bees won't close it down, but if you get a bigger one, they'll fill the gap up. Well, hang on, why is that? My guess is that once they use it as a passage, they'll carry on using it as a passage, and also probably they might not be able to build the comb and to repair the comb in a small bit. I don't know. That needs a bit of thought. Yep, carry on.
Graham and Siobhan ask, and I think this was on the back of your image of wax cappings for honey when it's been robbed. What do the cappings look like when the bees have consumed their own?
Oh, they chew the cappings right off, because don't forget, the bees have got to get down inside the cells. All the robber bees are doing there is just ripping the capping off to get what they can, to get a belly full to go home, and then they might not come back again. But of course, the colony that's in there, they will uncap it, and they've got to get down into the base of the cell. Because don't forget, a worker bee came out of the cell in the first place. So they've got to chew it right back.
Peter Jenkins asks, what about alcohol wash for monitoring Varroa?
I like that. I think it's much more accurate than the sugar roll is. Now, you do lose 300 bees or whatever it is. Yes, 300 bees. But if you don't do anything, you're going to lose a lot more than 300 bees. So yes, I think that's I think that's good. As much as anything, it gets people sort of handling their bees and, you know, feeling for the colony rather than just treat it as something over there that's a box or whatever. You need, if you're going to do that, I think you need to monitor it regular. Now, the one person who's very much into this is, of course, Randy Oliver, and he's got quite a lot on his scientific beekeeping website on that. Yep.
This one's a good one. I've heard of brood breaks during a nectar flow to increase honey production. How do you actually do it?
Right. This is what the old beekeepers used to do. And what they did was, well, let's look. Sorry, read the question again. Are you there?
Sorry, I was coughing. I've heard of brood breaks in a nectar flow to increase.
Yep. Okay, I'm with you. Yeah. If you've got brood in a colony, brood is incredibly hungry. So that takes up quite a lot of the input. If you've got no brood to feed, it means that the bees can actually store more. Now they're only feeding for 6 or 7 days, something like that. So a trick of the old beekeepers used to be, if you take the queen away from the colony, then if you know the weather forecast is going to be good for the next week or two, you've got a nectar flow on. Take the queen away from a colony, and you could probably put her in a small nucleus or something like that. If you've got a decent queen, you certainly don't want to get rid of her, although some did. And what there's 2 or 3 techniques. You can either put it in a nucleus, and always put 2 supers on. One could be enough if you've got a real nectar flow on, and they produce more honey. And then you can either put the cut out all the emergency cells and put the old queen back, or you can let the emergency cell end up with a laying queen. And what you end up then is about 20. What you're going to have 24 perhaps to 28 days without brood. And if you've got a nectar flow on that time, you're okay. Now, don't forget, there's lots of things going on here, because if an egg is laid today, that bee, the resultant bee, isn't foraging for about 6 weeks. Don't forget, 3 weeks to emerge, 3 weeks as a house bee, so it's not going to start foraging. So if, let's say, it was in nectar flows in June, it's not going to have any effect later in the season, because the bees aren't going to be foraging for very long, if at all. So that's what they used to do. It was a technique. It must have been something that was introduced after the movable comb hive, so probably back after the 19th century. And it was certainly done by some of the older beekeepers. When I started beekeeping in the early 1960s, people don't do it now. But if I've got a queenless colony during the summer, I always put two supers on it, because I know what's going to happen.
Excellent. What are the problems about having 12 Hoffman brood frames in the box instead of 11 and a dummy?
Right. Well, yeah. No, it's not a dummy. It's a division board. If you've got a dummy, you've got the same as a frame. If they're packed in there, you can't easily get one frame out without rolling the bees. If you roll the bees, two things happen, or two things can happen. One is you wind them up, which is no real fun, especially if you work gloveless like I do. And the other thing is, of course, you run the risk of killing or even maiming the queen. So what usually happens is that the people put 11 and a division board.
Excellent. Janet says, with small patches of mold on a few super frames, what should we do?
Mold on super frames is likely to be caused by pollen that's gone moldy. With the bent end of the hive tool, just scratch it out and the bees will repair it. No problem at all. But it's going to be pollen, I think. Now, I've really got to check this because it's sort of observational things that you should notice. My guess is it doesn't happen with bee bread. Just pollen that haven't turned into bee bread. But I'm going to have to check that out.
Do you think that would be right, though? Because the honey would suppress the mold in the bee.
It should do, Richard, yeah.
Ian's found the uncapping tray. I've posted the link he's sent into the Q&A.
Okay.
You want me to say the name of the supplier or not?
Yeah, go on then.
Oh, Schwente.
Right, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Scandinavian, yeah.
Yeah. Hazel wants to know if Worsby Green Apiary welcomes visitors. I've told her to join the back of the queue. I'm going first.
It depends where she comes from. It depends if she likes border collies too. Of course, everybody's welcome.
Well, you're gonna regret that one. I noticed you said that while we've only got 88 left. Maria is transferring a national brew box into a new 1412 tomorrow. She wants to know if she can start feeding liquid feed, even though the temperatures are going to get rather low over the next few days.
Well, I wonder why she's transferring now. Depends where she lives.
She lives in Hertfordshire.
Oh, right, okay. Fairly. Depends how she's doing it, really.
I presume she's just sitting the 14 by 12 on top of the.
Oh well, then yeah, no problem. But if she shook swarming or something like that,
yeah, she doesn't actually say.
Well, I wonder why she's transferring from standard. She's going from standard to the bigger 14 by 12, is she?
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the sounds of it, yeah.
I wonder why. But, if she wants 14 by 12, let her have 14 by 12.
Yeah.
14
by 12 underneath the national, she says.
Oh, right. I'll tell you what I think will happen. I think if we get a few days cold weather, the bees aren't going to expand. And I think what they'll do is they'll climb all over the 14 by 12, make it go stale, and then they won't build it out very well. I think I'd leave it and put it on top. And the reason I put it on top is because heat rises, and I think it will help the bees to build the comb.
Yeah,
it's these things are always difficult without saying it, because also she's got a band of honey above the brood. The queen probably won't go above that to get onto the 14 by 12. But in any case, get the 14 by 12 largely drawn out above, and then put it underneath, I would think, so the bees actually move down. Yeah, but I won't say too much, because there might be other people listening with a different sort of situation. I don't want to confuse anyone or give people erroneous information.
Yeah.
But I generally like to see photographs or see these things before advising.
And finally, Tim, as a comment, Roger, don't use aspirin, use paracetamol, as it won't cause problems with the stomach. For instance, ulcers.
At my age, it don't really matter too much, does it?
Hey, you've
thanks
still
very
got
much.
A lot of webinars to do.
Thanks very much for the thought. Yeah, we have got some more, and if anyone's still listening, then I hope to see you a bit later.
Yeah, Queen Cell, their recognition and uses.
Yeah, I'm going to have my dinner. Do you mind?
And no, you'll help yourself.
Okay, and take the dogs for a walk.
All right.
Okay, yeah.